Senator Watt.
I have one or two questions that I'd like to put forward. One is you mentioned in your presentation, and we also heard it from the minister himself directly, that this bill is targeting the, well, if you want me, the big people, the actual growing the marijuana and also attempt to trafficking. Does that mean that an Aboriginal, not Aboriginal person, but a young person, whether it's an Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal, how is that person is going to be dealt with if he is carrying a certain amount of, let's say, whatever the drugs he's carrying, might be not necessarily for the purpose of intent to traffic, but the fact is he got caught. What happened there?
Well, if he's charged with possession, then he will face the existing provisions, the existing penalties that are now found in the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, and these new provisions would not apply to him.
The new provision will not apply?
No, it does not apply to possession of any of the drugs, in fact.
Okay, can you comment on the argument that community-based sentence with the support, such as addictions treatment programs, can be more effective?
I cannot. Community-based sentencing is not something I'm very familiar with.
Thank you.
Senator Campbell.
Thank you. Again, with this bill, there are pieces of it that I like and some that I just don't understand. The first question I have is, why would you put a number on the plants and attach that to sentencing?
Well, it was in part to recognize that there are different levels of meaning to different quantities of plants. Someone who has 500 plants in his house obviously has in mind something a little different than someone who has 4 or 5 plants, and so on. So using that as the logic, we attempted to find levels that we thought were clearly indicative of commercial intent and levels where it was not as clear. And so, for instance, the 6 to 200 plants could be for a commercial purpose, but it's not necessarily evident. And so we inserted for the purpose of trafficking. That would catch then the commercial intent. And anything over 200 we believed to be inherently for a commercial purpose. And we made a distinction between under 500 and over 500 for greater penalties.
Have you ever seen a room with 200 plants in it?
I have not.
Let me give you some idea, okay? You could have it in this room, easy. But I'll tell you something. You know what? If you're convicted and you have a commercial operation and you're gang related, I think they should put you someplace where they send you sunshine in a tin can, okay? But to get to that point, somehow the law has to reflect that, and this law does not reflect that. And the fact of the matter is that rather than worry about the number of plants, the worry should be the attachment to gang-related and to organized criminals. And that's what I feel so strongly about in this bill. I mean, suddenly, and I know that you say, oh, well, this isn't going to happen. Well, I was on drug squad for 8 years, and I can tell you that it can happen, where I find somebody with 6 plants, and, oh, they've been bad boys before, and guess what? It's time to bring the hammer down. I know that that happens. My difficulty is that all of a sudden, marijuana, which I might add for the record is about $8 billion a year in my province, is now being thrown in with heroin, cocaine, meth, and crack. So my next question is how do we bring all of that together into this bill where all of those drugs are classified basically the same? We're going to 14 years for possession for the purpose, right? So tell me how we bring that all together into the same bag.
Well, I'm not sure I have an answer to that particular question, but I can point out a few things. This bill does propose minimum penalties, and the maximum penalties for most of these offenses are still life. And we are increasing the maximum penalty for production from 7 to 14 years. Beyond that, I think your question goes beyond what we're trying to do in this bill, and I'm afraid I don't have an answer.
Okay. Last question. Well, maybe my last question. I get popped with 200 plants of marijuana. What kind of treatment program do I go into? If I have we're talking about drug treatment and courts and all of this. What kind of a treatment program to go into, and what exactly am I being treated for?
Well, the treatment program would be if you were an addict or had some form of dependency on a drug.
Is there any evidence you have that marijuana is addictive?
That's a controversial question, and the chairman, I'm sure, has some interesting views on that.
I'll tell you what.
An interesting.
Chairman. I'll tell you my concern. Okay, and this will be my last comment. The drug czar of the United States. I asked him once if marijuana was addictive, and he said absolutely. It was one of the most dangerous drugs going. I said, well, how do you determine if somebody is addicted or is treated? He said, well, if you go to court and you take the treatment, you must be addicted. That was the distinction, and that's what I'm so worried about in this, that suddenly we've moved beyond that, and we're killing, we've just moved beyond it. And I'd like you to come back again, because I feel terrible. There's so many questions I'd like to ask you, and I feel terrible because of our problems that you didn't have full time. But I thank you for coming.
J'avais une question.
I have a few questions regarding aggravating factors pursuant to Section 3. Section 3 of C-15. Person is liable to imprisonment if there is a risk to health or safety of any person who is 18 years or younger. And if there's a risk to a residential home. This is clearly the case in terms of grow operations, but under B and C, for me, to carry out a grow operation in a home, the fact that it takes place in a home in and of itself is an aggravating factor. And I'm worried that the constitution of a potential risk to security, health, or safety hazards would make it more difficult to determine those aggravating factors. And that, in fact, there's an additional risk to public safety. Was I clear enough in my question?